Welcome to episode 10 of the Pollination Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about when to harvest queens and increasing queen introduction acceptance. Okay, first just let me say I'm sorry. I know I'm behind on the podcast episodes. I was going for a bi-weekly release, and then we got so behind that I thought, I'll do a monthly release. And it's been a struggle to have the time to record anything. I've been thinking about it, but we've just been in peak spring season right now, and we're building hives 7 days a week, moving hives almost every other night. I have customers coming and going almost every day. So it's been pretty overwhelming. We're still behind, still trying to put on honey supers right now. It's been pretty chaotic. So I think at least during peak season, I'm just going to do a podcast episode when I can. Maybe the more regular releases will be fall or winter when I can have a little bit of time. I usually try to do them when we have a rain day where I get rained out, but we just haven't been shut down, which I'm glad for. We've been able to work 7 days a week for quite a while now, but everything's going great. I'm going to keep trying to get the episodes out, so just be patient with me. They're going to be pretty sporadic until maybe the season slows down, but I will get them out when I can. Thank you so much. Our main focus this year has been on raising queens. We've been raising cells and mated queens for years now, but we're now really trying to ramp it up to get more in that kind of commercial realm. We set a goal to have 500 mating nukes, and we've built them. And I will eventually make an episode and talk about all the different types of mating nukes. We've tried just about everything that you can. I think we're going to go all in on those mini styrofoam nukes. We've got about 100 we're testing now, and I should harvest those queens in about 2 weeks. And if they're good, I'm looking at maybe buying a couple hundred more. And we've been supplementing mostly with our 5-frame nukes, but I'll have to make an episode comparing the two one day because there really is a huge difference between the two, and especially when it comes to profitability and production from the business side of things. But one thing we've had to really decide on is when are we going to harvest our mated queens to sell them to a customer. That's a huge debate amongst beekeepers. The large queen rearers, like, some, I won't name them, but some of the really large ones will harvest their queens every 14 days. Some people will say 21. There are guys that do 28 days. They do 35 days. And when I'm saying those numbers, that's like say 14 days. That's 14 days after the cell hatches. So that queen is 14 days old or 21 days old. And there's pros and cons of harvesting them on different dates. We have to look at it through the perspective of business, right? We want to turn over as many queens as quickly as possible so we make a greater profit. As soon as I take that queen and I can sell her, I can put another cell in and keep that cycle going because, our window to raise queens is not very long. So that's something we've really been wrestling with. I've been doing a ton of research on trying to decide what we want to do with our queens. And I'm pretty sure I've come up with a system I'm pretty happy with. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I found a really great Australian study. It's called The Introduction and Early Performance of Queen Bees. I'll post a link in the description, but they really break down in really clear numbers when to harvest a queen. And when I say harvest, I mean put her in a cage and sell her to a customer or introduce her into a new beehive. So, and we've been testing different days out here at the house too, just to kind of see what's best for us, what's best for the customers, what's best for the business. And it's an evolving process. 2 weeks from now, I may change my mind on something, but I just want to share what I have learned, and I want to share what we're currently doing. We just very recently got our Florida state queen breeder certification. The state bee inspector came and took a sample of our drone larva and sent it off to a lab to check for any kind of Africanized genetics. And we passed. Thankfully, we didn't have any. And now we're on a publicly available list for Florida state queen breeders, which is really exciting. So now we kind of need to ramp up production because we're getting more orders just because we're publicly available and we're not just selling locally anymore. We're also beginning to ship queens nationally, although on a very small scale. We're just kind of tipping our toes in there. We're not an expert on it, but we have shipped some queens already. So what I want to talk about today is when should you harvest your queens and how can you increase the acceptance of introducing a mated queen into a queenless colony? In my opinion, there are three main problems if you have an issue with acceptance or early supersedure when it comes to mated queens. Typically, the queens were raised too early in the season, which usually means there's just not enough drones or sexually mature drones in the area. So a lot of times you end up with drone-laying queens, or you have a lot of early supersedure. We had huge issues with that this year. People were calling us in January, February, begging for queens. And, we're a business, so I tried to acclimate to those orders. And what happened is the queens we made in February, especially like the first half of February, and I mean the cell hatched around that time, I would say at least 50% or greater. I think in some cases we had up to 75% of those queens come back as drone layers. So we had to scrap all those nukes. I don't try to save drone laying hives. I just combine them with a queen right hive, let them clean up all that bad drone comb, and I don't even pinch the queen. I just stack them. I think generally the bees from the queen right hive will kill the drone laying queen, and over a few days or a week or two they'll clean all that comb up, and then you just resplit it again, and hopefully by that point queen right queen has gone up there and laid on that box where I combined it. But we lost a ton of nukes and doing that, and even the ones that were queen right there were supersedure cells everywhere. They were just trying to replace the queen. Some of them, once we got that first set of brood hatched out from the queen, they removed the supersedure cells, and that's a common thing. Once you have the new generation from that new queen, they'll usually settle down. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes that supersedure cell opens up and you have to restart the whole queen process over. And it was really tough because we had some commercial guys trying to buy queens early because they have nuke orders early in the year, and they were trying out our queens. So we really wanted to produce and sell for them, especially to get our name out there, because the most profit, honestly, is selling to the commercial guys that'll call and order 100 queens or 500 queens or whatever. I can just get out there, cage them all, sell them wholesale, and drop new cells in and start over. And it's a lot of work selling to smaller beekeepers that are buying one queen here and there, because it tends to throw all my mating nukes out of whack on their timing. I would rather somebody just come by and say, hey, what do you have this week? I cage everything and just keep going. And that way all the mating nukes are on the same cell cycle, harvest cycle. It's much easier for me. So we had to really push for that, but it was a struggle. The mating success got much better in March. And I say much better. I think we were probably maybe doing 70%. It was still worse than we had last year. And now that we're in April, we're getting upwards of maybe an 80% mating success. But still worse than last year. Last year we were getting upwards of 90% right out the gate in March. And if I came back and threw a second queen cell in at 3 weeks after the original cell hatched, if I didn't see any signs of a queen, I was able to get up to a 95% success rate. And I have not seen that this year. I don't know what's going on. We have adjacent drone yards. I've got a drone yard that's less than a mile up the road. I've got another one that's about 2 miles down the road. There's another massive commercial apiary 2 miles down the road from me. That all those drones should be within flight range of me. I bought all those drone frames, the green plastic ones that just produce drones, to really increase the area. I mean, really making an effort to make sure everything's properly mated. But we have just been having really bad luck with our mating compared to last year. And I've been speaking to some of the other beekeepers, and they've been seeing the same thing. So I don't really know what's going on. And it's frustrating because the weather's been really just ideal mating weather. So we're going to just kind of keep pushing forward for that, but it has definitely kind of hit our queen production. So that's been an issue for queens being raised too early. The other big thing that you have to be careful of when you're purchasing mated queens or selling mated queens are harvesting the queens too young. The Australian study breaks down what days most beekeepers will harvest their queens at, and that typically is on a 14-day cycle, a 21-day cycle, a 28-day cycle, and a 35-day cycle. Those are the most common. So that's what that study focuses on. And what's really interesting is in the study, they're looking at how many queens are alive after 2 weeks after being introduced to a new queenless colony. And they also come back and they check at 15 weeks. And they break down all the percentages. And again, I'll post this in the description. And I just want to say up front, we've chosen to do the 21-day cycle, just so you can kind of know that going into it. So every 3 weeks, we're caging a queen from the time the queen cell hatches. So that queen is at minimum 21 days old. And although for us, we make sure we see at least some cap worker brood, because they're not always cap worker brood at 21 days. And if there's no cap worker brood, I don't feel confident as a breeder to sell that queen. How these big commercial guys are selling them with eggs or larvae and they feel comfortable selling you a queen, regardless of the percentages I'm about to give you, is beyond me. Because I've been marking hives that are around 14 days, because we considered selling them then. Because, right, you can produce 2 queens a month versus 1 queen a month. I mean, you double your production. I see the temptation to do that. But there are a lot of colonies that I'll mark, and I'll say, okay, this one's got eggs, it's got larvae, I don't see raised comb, the larvae are pearly white, they look great, the hive seems happy. And I'll come back a week later, and it's a drone layer. I mean, just solid drone layer. And so I'm skeptical that these guys are even checking anything. I think they're just seeing eggs, they're seeing some larvae, and they're popping that queen in a cage and they're selling it to you. And that's, in my opinion, terrible. But again, check the study out for yourself. Of course, everything, try for yourself. We're still learning, so take everything I say here with a grain of salt. But this is where we're currently at. So that study talks about if you harvest a queen at 14 days old, 2 weeks after that queen is introduced to a queenless colony, you have anywhere between a 47.5% acceptance rate to as high as a 70% acceptance rate. Pretty low. I mean, you're not looking much better than a 50-50 shot when they're caging them at 14 days. That's not even really discussing whether they're drone layers or not. That's just whether the queen is still there and alive. At 21 days old, when you introduce a queen, you can get as low as an 80% success rate to about as high as an 85% success rate. When you do a 28-day harvest, your low acceptance is 85%, and it can be as high as 95%. When you get into the 35-day range, which you're producing less than 1 queen a month, that's not even viable to me. You're getting about as low as a 90% to a 95% that are going to be accepted and alive 2 weeks after, according to this study. So I wouldn't even consider 35 days. I mean, you're getting like an extra 5% maybe success rate. But again, you're not even producing 1 queen a month. That's just not profitable whatsoever. So to me, it looks like the 21 to 28 days seem to be the most ideal. The study comes back and checks these hives 15 weeks after the queens have been introduced. And the 14-day-old queens, only 15 to 70%, with massive range there, huge fluctuations. You have a 15 to 70% of those queens were still there and laying. When you get to 21 days old, you had a 62 to 72% acceptance rate where the queens were still there in the colony. At 28 days old, you had a 60% to an 87% acceptance rate. And at 35 days old, you had a 72% to an 87% success rate. So again, the 35 days is still better, but not significantly so. I really think the sweet spot to cage a queen is in that 21-day mark or the 28-day mark. And the way we chose 21 days is because if the queen is a little bit delayed and we don't see cap brood at 21 days after the cell hatches, almost can guarantee that I'm going to cage her on that 28th day, or there's something that went wrong. So we're generally caging in the 21 to 28 day range, and I think that's probably just the sweet spot because you really hit diminishing returns from a production standpoint as a business when you hit that 35 days and you're pushing that long. It's just not ideal. Another thing the study measured, and this was really fascinating, was the pheromone levels of the queens at the different ages that they were caged. So they measured 10 different queen pheromones. The queens were between the ages of 7 days and 35 days old. And the stronger the pheromone levels, the more attractive they are to a queenless colony, the less likely they're going to ball and kill that queen or supersede her. It's a real test of the quality of that queen, at least the attractiveness of her and the likelihood that she's going to be accepted by a new colony. Won't go into all the numbers because they're small decimal numbers. You should really look that up. But I will say the peak pheromone levels were between 21 days and 28 days old for the queens. So that again kind of reinforces the ideal time to cage a queen is between 21 days and 28 days. Pheromone levels actually begin to drop down after 28 days, which is another reason to just not harvest that queen when you hit the 35-day period. So when you're buying a queen from a queen breeder, and sometimes it's an uncomfortable question to ask, people do ask me, it hasn't bothered me, but I have asked other beekeepers and I don't know, it feels uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be. There's two questions you always need to ask your queen breeder if you're buying queens from them. Number one, how old are your queens when you harvest them? If they don't say at least 21 days, in my opinion, you're getting a very low quality queen that has not been proven whatsoever. I believe 21 days after the cell hatches is the absolute minimum they should be selling those queens or being removed from her hive at all. You're just going to have a lower acceptance rate, and if they do get accepted, they're going to get superseded. The second question is, have these queens been banked in a queen bank, and if so, for how long? I'll tell you right now, if you're buying queens from a commercial producer, those queens are being banked. Even at our small scale with 500 mating nukes, and we don't harvest them all at the same time, right? We harvest a little bit every single week, so we have queens available all the time, and so I can leave them in their original mating nuclei. I still have to bank them for short periods of time. Almost always it's just to prepare an order. If a commercial guy calls me and he wants 300 queens and he wants to pick them up that week, I can't go out there and cage 300 queens in a day by myself. It's not physically possible. We have some help now on the weekends that they do come in and help me cage queens and run through all these mating nuclei. But sometimes I've got to cage them during the week by myself. And depending on how the mating nukes look and if I'm rebuilding them as I'm going through them, which in my opinion, if you're already in the hive, why not just fix it if there's a problem? I can only cage about 50 queens a day. The best I've done is 100 queens, and that's when I wasn't fixing the mating nuclei. I found the queens usually on the first or second frame, and they were almost all queen right. I think that was last year when we had that 90-95% acceptance rate. So 100 is like best case scenario for me. I don't know if that's slow or not. I haven't talked to anybody else. But I would say my average is 50. And I've done less than 50. There's been days the mating nuclei were so bad, like at the beginning of the year, I struggled to cage even 30 or 40 in a day. So it can vary tremendously on how fast you can cage them. And if a guy wants several hundred and I'm doing 30 or 40 or 50 a day, obviously it's going to take me multiple days to do that. So I do put them in a queen bank. We're using a queen right queen bank this year, and I've had luck with it, thank goodness, because we tried it last year and it was a catastrophe. And we used a queenless queen bank last year. So I'm pretty happy with this because I don't have to keep dumping brood into it. But there are some little tricks you have to do to make it work. I have learned that the hard way after killing way too many queens. So again, we keep ours only banked from the time that I have to cage them, and basically I can either ship them out to you as a customer or you come here and pick them up. Nobody's just sitting in there for a week or 2 weeks or anything like that, because there's a lot of research that the longer the queen is banked, she has diminishing pheromone levels and her foot pads get damaged. All that can trigger early supersedure of the queens. And a lot of these huge guys, these guys that are producing thousands and thousands of queens every month, they're banking those queens. There's no other way to do it. And they're also running them in these little miniature mating nukes like we're trying out this year. And I've already seen from firsthand experience, 21 days is about as long as you can keep that queen in there without them swarming. I've not been able to keep them in there much longer than that. So these guys are not doing that. You can always transfer the queen into another colony and let her lay that up, maybe a larger colony, but then you're double handling the queen and it's twice as much time and labor. That's just not very viable. So a few tips we've learned on what's the best way to introduce a queen to the colony. Personally, I don't find putting the cage in any particular spot all that important, so long as, the weather's not freezing or flooding or scalding hot. Obviously you want to have the queen nearby where the brood nest is, but what we've been doing, because we run our hives on 4-way pallets, I've just been taking that cage and sliding it right back in the entrance. I try to push it where it's about centered under the hive. If you have a bottom board, you can totally do that. We used to put them in between the frames, but it was just so much extra work opening up the colony, and then the frames are usually skewed. Sometimes the bees build comb around the cage, and it's less access to the queen. So now I just walk down the line and slide the cages right underneath the hive, and they do just fine. They don't push them out. I don't have any issues with that, and it's just much better in my opinion. When is the best time to introduce a new queen to the colony? Obviously, springtime is the best. That's when the bees want to have a new queen. That's when they want to reproduce. If you can add a queen during a honey flow, that is the best time. That's when you're going to get the best queen acceptance. So spring typically is going to be your ideal time to do that. When the bees are fat and they're just engorged with honey, they are far more likely to accept a queen. And you generally have a high concentration of nurse bees around that time too, because the colony is expanding, or you're making a fresh split and hopefully you're adding plenty of nurse bees for that split. So that's like the ideal peak time. Now, realistically, you're going to have to add a queen to a hive for whatever reason in a non-honey flow period. If you're in a dearth period like we are here in the summer, and a dearth period is just a period of time where there's not any nectar coming in or probably pollen to the colony, basically a famine period for the honeybees, best chance to increase your queen acceptance during that time period is to feed that colony. And again, that won't be quite as good as the honey flow, but that's your best case. That way the bees, again, they're fat, they're engorged. The bees are in a state of feeling like they have enough resources, and they're just going to be more accepting of a new queen. However, one thing you have to really be mindful of, if you're in a dearth period and you're feeding your colonies, that of course can trigger robbing. If you have robbing, don't introduce a queen. If the hive is being robbed by other honeybees, that will drop your queen acceptance pretty significantly, or the queen can just be killed by the attacking colony. So if you ever see any robbing in a hive, best just don't even open the hive. Just go on, come back later, come back another day, even better. But feeding during a dearth period, as long as you can manage the robbing, is the ideal time to do that. Also, colonies with a younger population of worker bees will more easily accept a new queen, but a high population of older bees, which are your field force, will decrease that acceptance. Because of that, it's better to introduce a new queen on a warm, sunny day due to the fact that your foragers are out working compared to an overcast or cold day where they stay inside the colony, because that will increase the concentration of your older bees, which will actually drop your acceptance. So that's just a few tips we've learned. We're still really trying to get a hang of all the queen rearing process. I'm working every day to try and get better. I just wanted to share some of the things that I've learned and sort of tell people too what we're doing as far as when we're harvesting our queens and as far as queen banking goes, because some people just don't know that or they feel uncomfortable asking. So I wanted to be upfront with that on what we're doing. There's a lot more episodes I would love to do on queen rearing, and I'm absolutely going to, because this is probably my main passion when it comes to beekeeping. And those mini styrofoam nukes are my current obsession. So I've got to get back to it. I will try to get another episode out as soon as I can. I haven't forgotten about it. Thank you for being patient with me. I know some of you guys have been asking me and checking up, and I really do appreciate that for everyone that's listening and commenting. And I am going to link that Australian study down in the description, so make sure to check that out. And until then, I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Pollination Podcast. I'm Matthew Walker from Walk in the Woods Apiary. We hope we have answered a few of your beekeeping and pollinator questions. Please share your questions and comments to our Facebook page at the Pollination Podcast.